Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources. I'm Stu Reid. I'm here with my co-host, Dave Burstein.
Hello.
What's
We
up,
got some
Dave?
good news this week.
Yeah, what's going on?
5G is going to come to the New York City subways.
Wow.
Yeah. And they're working on making it not just in the stations, but on the moving trains.
Wow, that's a big deal, isn't it?
Well, it's something that actually matters in what we do every day. Now, 5G is no better than 4G for most things, but it does allow the network to do some better stuff. Among other things, it was designed from the beginning to work on the trains in China. Part of the specification of the 5G system was going to be that it could work on the 200-mile-per-hour trains that are routine in China. And so they should have no trouble with the New York City subways, although that's pretty challenging. I understand it's still the largest in the world, although places like Shanghai have grown at an enormous rate.
That still amazes me, Dave, that the cell phone technology can keep a call connected while you're moving at 200 miles an hour. That's pretty darn amazing, isn't it?
Well, the next bit is connecting at something that's going at I don't know how many thousand miles an hour. We got the announcement that T-Mobile and Starlink, Elon Musk's outfit, are going to be able to allow you to send short messages across the satellites and ultimately phone calls. That's 2 years away. But next week, there's a new Apple announcement. It's going to have a new iPhone. And probably that is set to already connect to the Global Star satellite network. And we'll be able to send text messages. I spend a lot of time with the technology in wireless. I'm friends with a lot of the key engineers there. And there are something on the order of 25,000 senior engineers making wireless work. There's a few hundred of them just working in the standards to define what's going to be coming.
Wow.
It's enormously complicated. And it's really amazing, as you say, that for most of us, it just works. That's a great thing.
You know, I'm reminded of the quote from who's the famous scientist. I'm blanking on his name, but you'll remember his name and tell me in a minute. But Clark, what he said was that technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. And to me, we're like right on the cusp of that stuff where the stuff just, like you said, it just works, but we have no idea. The average person has no idea how it works, and it kind of looks like magic in so many ways.
Well, one that really looked at
Arthur C. Clarke is the author of that quote.
Yeah, and Childhood's End, and many other fine books that are still standing up 50 years after he wrote them. Clarke, unfortunately, did not become one of the richest men in the world, despite having one of the most important inventions. Back in 1945, patent law didn't allow him to patent what he was talking about. In effect, was the first to talk about, probably can be considered the inventor, geosynchronous satellites at 22,000 miles up there. That was actually his idea. Today,
that's amazing. Let me, it sounds a fancy term, but it's really kind of simple. But what Clark said back in 1940 something, according to what David's telling us, he figured out that a satellite at 22,000 miles up in space, moving at the right velocity, it would revolve at the same speed, orbit the Earth at the same speed that the Earth is turning. So it would appear to any person on Earth that it was stationary. So what he figured out and what technology finally came around to a few decades later was that you could bounce signals up and down from that satellite because it appears to be, for all intents and purposes, stationary in the sky. And that's how satellite TV and satellite communications, that was really the birth of that, was it not, Dave?
Well, it was 15 years plus before we got the first satellites up there actually doing the communications, which is why he couldn't patent it. And now it's getting even more confusing. 22,000 miles round trip is enough to put a quarter-second delay in your signal.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't matter when something like a TV show is coming down. It runs continuously, you put a little bit of a buffer in, but it makes it really uncomfortable for phone calls and other things that are time sensitive, live stuff. There's a solution to that problem. And that's happening really fast. Those are low Earth orbit satellites that are much closer, have no latency, and Elon Musk Starlink most of the time gets 50 and 100 megabits reliably to your satellite dish on top of your home.
Now, Dave, I want to ask you a semi-geeky question about those satellites. I can remember back when Doug Frazier and I, my business partner, first getting going, there's a guy named Kenny Schaefer who put a satellite dish on top of Columbia University and tracked the Russian satellites. And the dish had to move because the Russian satellites went across 5 different time zones. Now, my question is, with Musk's satellites in the Starlink system, which are much closer to the Earth, they're not in geosynchronous orbit. Doesn't that mean that in order to track them, that the tracking antenna has to move? Is that
well? The receiver has to receive from multiple connections, and the only way to do that until recently was for the antenna to move and point in different directions. At the speed that had to do it, that was a challenge. One of the reasons the antennas were so expensive. Now, there are many ways to do what's called a phased array that uses a multiplicity of radios in order to track things. Doesn't have to move. It changes which radios are receiving and what the signal is like. That was invented many years ago for Defense Department radars. And that technology is now making it down into consumer affairs. One good piece of news, incidentally, is the capacity of those satellites is picking up. So much so that Musk is not able to sell enough receivers or get enough customers in most of the world. He just dropped the price by half in Mexico.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's down 20% or 30% in Germany. In the US, he's still backlogged a year, and sometimes you get congestion. But the rest of the world, he doesn't have the marketing yet working very well. There's a slew of more satellites coming. OneWeb is being backed by the British and French government.
What's the name?
OneWeb, as in the number one.
Okay.
Yeah. And also a major Indian conglomerate. Amazon, Bezos is doing tests to put up his constellation. And the Chinese have set up the first 7 satellites in what's going to be a 600 satellite constellation because for some reason they don't want to be dependent upon the Americans for their
I can't imagine why. 600 satellites, Dave?
Yeah.
Isn't it getting kind of crowded up there?
Yes and no. Uh, yes, in that astronomers are having trouble because there are too many things interfering. And yes, because everybody is worried about collisions. These things are moving at thousands of miles an hour. You hit even something very small hitting you has so much momentum that it's an explosion. But it's pointed out that when we're looking at 25,000 miles around in both directions and hundreds and thousands of miles up and down, that there's plenty of room. And in fact, they're not yet figured out a way to guarantee that nothing will happen, but there hasn't been a problem yet.
Mm-hmm.
And there's thousands of satellites up there.
Dave, I had another semi-geeky, semi-uninformed question. As I understand the geostationary satellites that Arthur C. Clarke envisioned so many years before they actually came to fruition, they are the height at which they're at, the 22,000 miles, is at a height where they're not far enough away to go off into the atmosphere, yet they're not too closely pulled to the Earth. They just kind of sit there on their own without any fuel. Isn't that correct, or am I mistaken on that?
An object in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted upon by an external force.
Mm-hmm. I mean, but they're in an orbit and they stay in orbit.
Yep, just like the moon does.
Right.
And in fact, what I just quote you is Newton's laws of motion.
Yes.
To explain the moons.
Yes.
And ultimately the planets and the sun.
But
so
now,
when something,
now Musk satellites, those are very different. Don't those need a lot of fuel to stay in whatever their orbit is? How does that work?
Well, it's the same thing, but it's got a problem. You get it up there with a lot of fuel and big rockets, and you get it moving at the speed you need, and it would keep going, except the lower Earth orbits have an atmosphere to contend with.
Mm.
And the atmosphere is an external force that gradually, 10 or 100 years, slows them down enough that they fall. And that's what's going to happen to most of those satellites. There have been proposals, in fact, some of them are built, designed to re-enter automatically to prevent all the space junk from being there.
Mm.
But Musk is just saying the FCC can't even study whether that's necessary on the satellites he's putting up. He likes to start lawsuits all around the world on different things that he's doing. He sues people a lot. Some people think he's totally brilliant. He's done incredible things. Many of the people who work with him think he's remarkable, almost godlike. But a lot of other people working with him think he's a nasty bum who does things like sue employees who leave his employ, and he lies a lot. Maybe not knowingly, maybe he's just over optimistic about all the things he can and will do. But there are loads of false statements coming out of the man. But he has done remarkable things. Those rockets and those satellites are an achievement that's world changing.
Yeah, I mean, a global internet access. I mean, that's just amazing. It's a stunning achievement.
Yep, and it raises a question that it raises the $15 billion question. The U.S. has decided we need to connect everybody. That's a good decision. It makes it possible for the people in the really extreme areas in Alaska to be connected. But the program we have, the Department of Commerce, is spending as much as $80,000 a home to connect people. That's an awful lot. That's enough for almost 100 years of buying satellite service.
For one customer. Wow.
And satellite is now perfectly acceptable. It's 100 down, 20 up, about half the time, maybe 3/4 of the time, and almost always 50 and 10, except when it goes down for a few hours, as happened a few nights ago.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, otherwise known as blow-ups happen.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Heinlein's story about nuclear processing plants, nuclear power plants, that he wrote, I think in 1943.
Wow.
Yeah, because he understood enough of the technology to say there's going to be this problem.
Mm-hmm.
It could blow up. And some very smart people are very concerned right now because they're shooting rockets and artillery shells right by a nuclear reactor in the Ukraine as part of that war. And that is frightening.
Wow.
That's one of the arguments against more nuclear reactors that Chernobyl proved very conclusively that blow-ups happen, and who knows where. And that was why, for example, Germany has decided to phase out all its nuclear reactors. It's a problem there is that it was replacing a lot of them with Russian gas-fired reactors. And there seems to be a dispute between the East and the West, and Russia and the EU suggesting it's about the war in Ukraine, but it's more just the old battle, the Cold War being brought back. That's cutting off the supply of gas from Russia to Germany. And one of the things they're probably doing already in Germany and Japan are taking reactors that were designed to go offline after 30 years and doing the necessary repair work to keep them going. That's one of the ways that Germany hopes to get through the winter without the regular deliveries of Russian gas that they're blocking and boycotting. The world has changed, or the technology world, I should say, has changed in my lifetime. In fact, my lifetime as a journalist. When I started writing about this stuff and made it more than just an avocation, I've always been a geek. In 1999, the US was far ahead in all the stuff I covered, communications. We had the first fiber optics, the first DSL, the first digital switches. That has now changed. The US is becoming almost insignificant in the markets I track, which is all the communications equipment. We're maybe 15% of the market, where China at the moment is 2/3 of the market for 5G equipment.
Wow.
And China is, depending on how you measure it, is between 1/4 and 1/3. No, between 1/4 and 40% of the internet. This has a lot of consequences. For example, one of the new standards coming, the way you backhaul, take the message from your local fiber box, your ONT, back to connecting to the internet, is going to be the way China wants it to be, almost for sure. The Chinese decided they want a technology called 50G for 50 gigabit Ethernet. The AT&T, buying from European suppliers, decided that was a little too expensive, and they're trying to get to 25 gigabit units. They're saying that's enough. The Chinese are looking a little further ahead. They have a different system. What's A good analyst just wrote about what was happening and said the Chinese 50G is almost guaranteed to win because that's a quarter to 40% of the internet, and even more in the advanced stuff like this. And that's such a large market that they will get to economies of scale much faster than AT&T's choice, and will almost definitely dominate the market.
Now, Dave, when you say 40% of the internet, you're talking about usage? 40% of the usage on internet traffic is out of China?
I'm talking about the number of people connected.
Okay.
China has close to 500 million fiber to the homes connected. The whole world has a total of about 1.3 billion landline connections, and 40% of those are in China.
Gotcha.
When I look at the number of people connected in cell phones, that China has over 1 billion, but there are 4 or 5 billion in the world, so it's closer to 25%. Okay, now think a moment. China is having that happen because China has the 1.3 billion people. There's so many that it overwhelms the United States with 330 million people when you look at the quantities and the totals. What am I leaving out?
How about Africa? How about Asia? How about India?
Africa has just over 1 billion people. And I think we reported on this show about 4 years ago that it's soon going to have more internet connections than the United States has people, but they're far behind. But India is exploding. India has more people connected to the internet, almost all by 4G wireless, than the United States and Western Europe put together.
Wow. That's astounding.
And that is something that I wound up getting flamed by Vince Cerf for, because I've been saying that there's so many Chinese and so many Indians on the internet that they're changing everything. And when you look at how you organize the internet, how you govern it, if you don't include them, you're going to fail.
Wow. Dave, that's a huge topic. Let's take a brief break and come back to that, because I know that's something you're passionate about. And, you know, we both sit on this organization called the Internet Society. And so we kind of have some insight into what's going on. So let's get back to that. You're listening to Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after a brief break. Okay, we're back. Community Technology with Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on WACR 90.3. Before the break, we were talking a bit about India and China and what a massive share of internet traffic those two countries have. Dave, what are your thoughts about what's going on there?
Well, India now has 600 million people connected to the internet of their total population of about 1.3 billion. That's more than the United States and Western Europe put together. China is significantly bigger than India. This is changing the world, and there's a lot of news coming out of India that I want to get to, but let me get in a few short news pieces in just because they're interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
Bloomberg has announced that there's a flood in the market in oversupply, not in chips, which is happening separately, but in fancy phones, Rolexes and the likes, used being resold.
Mm-hmm.
Because there were so many people who made so much money on the crypto, they started buying enough Rolexes to change the market. And now when, for example, the price of Bitcoin has gone down 60%, many of them are leveraged, having borrowed money to buy, so they're getting margin calls, and they're dumping Rolexes on the used watch market.
That's funny.
Okay.
That's funny.
The number 3 U.S. cable co, Cox, and out of Atlanta, has now started selling their wireless. And in fact, Comcast and Charter are becoming major players in wireless. Now, none of them have a wireless network.
Mm-hmm.
They're all just reselling Verizons at this point, talking about one-day building. But you often can get a better price going to those, and even better if you go to TracFone, which has now been bought and is part of Verizon.
Mm-hmm. So how do they make money, David? Is that a loss leader for customers in other areas? How does that work economically?
Well, the wireless companies, and that's something I am an expert on, have a big problem. It costs billions to build the market and relatively nothing to reach another customer. To add another customer to a wireless network like Verizon's costs between $3 and $7 a month. When you think of all the bandwidth they use and the support calls and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
That's not very much. That means that if they sell at $30 a month, the ACP price for the poor, they're making a really nice profit on that customer. They make even a higher profit if they could sell it at $50 and $70 a month, which is why Charter is trying to screw up the entire ACP program over the years, so that people will have to spend $60 or $70 a month, not get it for the $30 a month federal subsidy.
Mm-hmm.
That results also in companies like Verizon and other big telcos all around the world selling bandwidth to other folks, which are called MVNOs, multiple something,
multiple virtual channel provider,
network operator,
mm-hmm.
Because it makes sense for Verizon to sell it at $15 wholesale to somebody who's going to buy millions of lines,
mm-hmm.
who then can come in at $40 a month, selling the exact same service that Verizon is selling for $60.
Mm-hmm.
And the game is on there. Somebody like Verizon has massive overcapacity. It's gotten much worse with the mid-band that we think of as 5G. Mm-hmm. They have more capacity than they can sell for the next 5 years.
Wow.
T-Mobile is up there. So on one hand, they don't want to cut the prices and and lose the $60 or $70 they're getting from their primary customers. But on the other hand, they would delighted to make money at $5 or $15 or $30 a month if they can do it without losing their primary customers.
Mm-hmm.
Reselling, supplying the cable companies is one of the ways they're doing it. Now, that may be a good thing for society overall, because in general, it's cheaper to build one network than to build two.
Yeah.
And that's cheaper than building the 4 or 7 that you need for competition to really work. So overall, there's a savings in the cost to the economy if you just have 1 or 2 networks. That was the old telecom and phone networks are a natural monopoly argument, and it's 3/4 true.
Mm-hmm.
So would we be better off if Comcast had to build a 4th or 5th network across the United States? More competition, it's good for that. But it also means that all the networks have fewer customers, have higher total construction costs, and that's not, could well be. It's much trickier than that, but that's the kind of issues we have. So that's going. Now, on the other hand, because the wireless have so much extra capacity, they're selling it to replace home broadband.
Mm-hmm.
Call it fixed wireless. And in the last year, Verizon, which is only just getting started, and T-Mobile, which doesn't offer it in more than about 1/3 of the country, have signed up 2 million customers. It's perfectly fine. Most people listening to this can pay $50 a month to T-Mobile, get a little box that you put in your window that would replace the connector to your fiber or DSL or cable,
Mm-hmm.
and get a service that works perfectly fine. When I test it on my cell phone, I get as much as 300 or 400 megabits down.
Wow.
And in some places could be getting 80 megabits up. That's what the wireless networks are able to do today.
Mm-hmm.
We just got a number across 400 something million wireless subscribers that their average was 600 megabits down, 78 megabits up. That was a nationwide survey by the Chinese, who have 2/3 of the 5G
Okay, wow.
in the country.
That's amazing. Big numbers.
Yeah. And Mukesh Ambani is about to bring that to India. And let's go through what's going to happen in India and what Ambani just promised in a big speech at his annual meeting.
Mm-hmm. Who's Ambani there? Who's that?
Ambani is one of the richest men in the world. By some reports, he's the richest man in India. He may have the most expensive house in the world, a 30-story skyscraper in Mumbai that is his family home. 30 stories. And he has all the gossip in India, a very colorful family.
Mm-hmm.
Hangs out with all the big movie stars, hangs out with Modi, the prime minister, who has had so many racist issues that the United States at one point refused him a visa, and now runs India.
Mm-hmm.
A brilliant, incredibly rich man who's decided he could double his fortune and do something good for his country. He is an Indian patriot by building them one of the best networks in the world. and he's already done it. He has 4G to over 95% of a country that has a lot of really poor areas that are hard to make a profit on. His average customer pays about $4 a month. For $10 a month, you can get a pretty decent connection. Two gigabytes a day, adding up to 10 to 60 gigabytes a month, which is a lot. And let's watch TV most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
That's across India. That's in the Himalayas.
Mm.
That is a remarkable achievement.
Well, how's he in the Himalayas, David? I mean, isn't this cell tower dependent?
And he's put towers enough
In the
to
Himalayas?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
He's put enough. I don't know. He hasn't covered all of the mountains, but he has put enough towers out there to cover 95% plus of the population.
Mm-hmm.
He claims 97%.
Okay.
Okay. He's done. When he built this network 5 years ago, he had better coverage than, say, Germany.
Mm-hmm.
He's now taking it even further. He just got his 100 megahertz of spectrum for 5G, and they're going to start turning it on in October. Just said, we are committed to make India the largest data-powered economy in the world, beating China and the United States. In 5G, our network will be the world's largest and most advanced. And he's going to deliver most of it. He probably won't quite pass the Chinese. They're doing incredibly well. And his network will be comparable, but probably not better to, say, T-Mobile in the United States. But it's going to be right up there, and it's going to be bigger because there are 1.3 billion Indians.
Wow.
600 million already connected. And what he's doing with 5G is going to connect hundreds of millions more at faster speeds, enough to watch a lot of video, which is the main thing people do with better speeds. The first thing he did is he decided to go right to what's called 5G SA Core. That was the design for 5G, has loads of important features. That's something that has not yet been implemented by Verizon or AT&T. He did most of the software for that in India. He has a complete stack core and a few thousand engineers working on designing systems in India, although he's buying some of his stuff from Nokia and Ericsson and Samsung as well. So he's got a heavy-duty network. He is going to put it where he has his 4G. He'll be at 80 or 90% of India by the end of next year. And we'll go there probably close to the 95%. Now, he's also building a fiber network. He's running fiber to the basement of all the apartment buildings, large ones, across India. He now has 7 million connected on fiber to the home. Wow. and just passed Verizon in the number of connected.
Really? Wow.
Behind AT&T and Comcast, but it just passed Verizon. And he is teamed up with Facebook and with Google. Ambani's dream, and he's delivered most of it, is to have everything. He's got a music service. that's as good as Spotify and Pandora. He has a book service, and he has a buying service, Geo's Retail, that's supported by thousands of retail stores and on the internet. And he just hooked up with Facebook, whose WhatsApp will now be the primary way you order groceries on the Geo system. As I say, 400 million subscribers are there.
Wow.
That's something that's happened in China, where everything is done in your cell phone, in one app, an app that does everything. Geo is building the same with Facebook, and they're going to use WhatsApp as the front end and Geo Retail for everything else. That's, I believe they've turned that on already. If not, it's in the next few months.
Mm.
Just if that isn't enough, he's putting together a $100 5G phone with Google.
Mm.
Remember, Google's CEO is Indian, and so are many of their top executives. And they know even better than I how big the Indian market could be.
Mm-hmm.
They want to get it. Google, Facebook, and Microsoft have all invested billions of dollars in Geo because they want to be allies of Ambani, which will help them get into the Indian network, which had been fairly protected. It's fairly protection, fairly playful. You go to the guy who's the biggest operator in India, cut a deal with him, and he delivers the government permissions you need.
Mm-hmm.
So Google has decided they want to have a big presence with Google phones, which are only about 2 or 3% of the worldwide market. They've been a disaster for Google.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know anybody with a Google phone?
I do not. I don't know. Didn't know they made a phone. I mean, is it Google branded?
It's Google branded. They
Never
even have
seen it.
TV ads. They're
Never seen it.
perfectly fine phones. They're a little bit cheaper than Apple, but not enough cheaper than anybody goes to them.
Mm-hmm.
But in India, they're going to be selling a phone with Geo for about $100, a 5G phone.
Wow.
That's going to be a almost 6-inch phone, is able to get the full 5G bandwidth, decent screen, decent camera, decent battery, a really nice phone for $100 a month. Now, that seems incredibly cheap because most people think 5G is expensive stuff because they think about $500 and $1,000 Apple phones.
Mm-hmm.
We had a guest on this show who said, oh, it's going to cost $500. No. You can buy here in the United States and across the world decent phones and decent PCs for $150 to $250. I'm talking to you now on what's about a $180 phone that is almost 6 inches, has a decent battery, has a decent camera. You're seeing me on it now. It's not as good as the iPhone, but it's perfectly fine for most people and most purposes. Google has taken the Android system, which it controls, and to come back with a version that's designed to use less memory and hence works in a less expensive phone. Google did that in cooperation with Geo 2 years ago in order to get to the Indian market where there are a lot of people who can't afford $500 phones. Well, they're selling some $1,000 iPhones in India. And so Google and Geo are going to bring the $100 phone to persuade people to sign up on Geo's network, which for $3 to $10 a month will give you a 100 meg plus 5G connection across most of the country by the end of next year.
Wow.
Last thing they're throwing in is something that Oracle and a lot of other people had done a few years ago and never really took off. I mentioned Geo is also putting fiber in, signed up 3 million customers in the last 6 months, and has the network to do way more, designed for 40 or 50 million customers. But the cost of a PC, even at $150 to $250, is a lot for many of the people in India. India has a huge middle class, probably as big as the American, but 80% of the people in India are still somewhere between poor and desperately poor.
Mm-hmm.
So what they're doing is they're going to run all the processing in the cloud and give you what's basically a screen and keyboard, what we used to call a terminal, that hooks up to the cloud PC. That's called a thin client.
Mm-hmm.
An idea that's been around a long time, but it never saved enough money to be commercially interesting. I don't know how much they're going to cost, but instead of the $150 to $250 PC, that'll probably be well under $100 to hook up to the fiber that will give you 100 megabits fiber for less than $10 a month. What's going to happen? Well, with 1.3 billion Indians, this is going to be a very attractive offer. So India will become not necessarily the best internet country in the world, but certainly remarkably up there. And more, the internet has a different color.
Yeah, yeah. That that's astounding, Dave, that we got that kind of advances happening in a country that's so poor. Wow, that's amazing. And
Well,
huh? I mean, that brings up another
so
issue.
poor.
Yeah.
The country overall has an awful lot of technology, an awful lot of skills, an awful lot of PhDs, an awful lot of manufacturing, but 80% of the people are so poor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, big stratification. Well, on another show, because we're almost out of time now, I want to talk about something that you kind of alluded to earlier, but we didn't have a chance to get into, and that is just the whole governance of the internet and who runs it. And when you look at where all the users are around the globe versus who runs it, primarily the US and Europe, small minority compared to the global users. And that's a big issue that I know you have some very strong views on, but we're gonna have to save that to another time. Any final thoughts before we go, Dave? This has been fascinating, and I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience has as well.
Well, let me repeat what I just said. The internet now has a different color.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Okay, thanks.
A lot of people don't think so.
Yeah, well, but it's changing nevertheless.
Good.
Yeah, you've been listening to Dave Burstein and Stu Reid on Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harvard. Stay tuned for more news and information. And don't forget to check us out every Wednesday, 5 to 6 p.m. Thanks for tuning in. Good night.